folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist and online nutrition coach. I focus in on sports nutrition, digestive health, prenatal nutrition, as well as overall practices that support physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being. I will be headed into maternity leave late next month, so I'm kind of winding down. But if working with me is something that you are interested in down the line, I will leave all the information, including a waiting list and things of that nature, once maternity leave is kind of completed. Today we are talking about what we can focus on, what we can put our energy towards that promote our health without focusing on that weight piece. So really looking at that definition of physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being being health versus just that physical piece that so often gets super focused on when we're talking about nutrition and healthy lifestyle changes. So if that sounds good to you, let's go. Before you make any changes to your lifestyle, to your intake, to your diet, all of that physical activity, be sure to check with your doctor to make sure that it is appropriate for you. So a couple months ago, I can't even remember at this time when it was, but I have a health at every size video where I talk about some of the concerns around health at every size. I also talk about kind of what the history of body aesthetics and kind of how that has really shaped how we see or how we strive for health. Health at every size is commonly misunderstood. There's a lot of confusion. There's also a lot of strong feelings around it. In my belief, I think a lot of the strong reactions or thoughts about it are a result of either not knowing the principles or not seeing the principles or being able to see the principles in action. I think that once a lot of people understand fully what health at every size is, what the principles are, I feel like that usually tends to help people to kind of get on more of the same page. Even if they're like on the other side of the page, they're on the same page at least, for the most part, in what I have seen in my experience. But it can be really confusing, especially when you have a lot of people just kind of taking bite-sized things here and there from the framework and not really explaining it fully. Maybe because they understand it or their audience is going to be people who do understand it fully, and so they don't need to kind of dissect it in that way for people who are getting introduced to what health at every size is, or maybe they just thought something sounded good and so they just took that little sound piece of it. I don't know, but it can be really confusing. So check out that video if you want to learn more about health at every size, and leave your thoughts on there. There's a lot of good discussion going on in the comment section there. I did get a really good comment or a question from a viewer on there, and so I wanted to read it out and then share my response because I think it was a really good question. So, and it was one that I was really confused about before too. The comments question is, great video. Can you explain the difference between the phrasing health at every size and healthy at every size? In the video, you said that it's definitely not healthy at every size. I'm a bit confused because when I think of the words health and healthy, I think of them being very similar. Did you mean not everybody is automatically healthy being at any size, but you can be healthy at any size with the right lifestyle? So, great question. In short, no. But in a longer answer, what I replied back is HAES is trademarked and stands for health. Some people will say healthy, they'll call it healthy at every size, but the trademark is health at every size. So I continue on, but because that it's not healthy is not the trademark, it's basically meaningless. I mean, it could have some meaning, but it's not the brand name essentially. So the principles aren't going to fit the framework. And the connotation is different, which is a great segue into the next part of the question. This is where the HAES principles come into play. So HAES is summarized by 5 principles, or summarized into 5 principles, which includes life-enhancing movement, which supports physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. It also includes health enhancement, which is the support of health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services, and personal practices that improve human well-being, including attention to individual physical, economical, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. It also includes eating for well-being, which promotes flexible, individualized eating based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than any externally regulated eating plan focused on weight control. It also includes respectful care, acknowledge our biases, and work to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, and weight bias. Provide information and services from an understanding that socioeconomical status, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and other identities impact weight stigma, and support environments that address these inequities. And weight inclusivity, which is to accept and respect the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes and reject the idolizing or pathologizing of specific weights. When I read those principles, nowhere in there does it really make sense to take HAES as a definition of everybody is healthy. And that would include lab values being within normal limits as much as possible, and also all of the other aspects of health, which is that physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being, according to the World Health Organization. I am not a spokesperson for HAES. I don't take this. This is just how I am perceiving it and how I have perceived it from being in a lot of different HAES aligned groups and being a member of the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. And just continuing education, books, all of that. But to me, I kind of see it as this kind of simplified. I wrote it as health equaling promotion and support of weight neutral healthy actions at every size, versus healthy being that already in a healthy place, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally. So that verb versus the adjective, if that makes sense. So why not focus on the scale? There are several ways to see that weight change, and not all of them can be healthy. You might be wondering, why are people so against dieting? We should be encouraging people to be healthier, right? That is a common question, and that's a valid question. What we know from decades of research is that the pursuit of weight change or that weight loss by itself, that rarely produces this kind of dream life, that lean, happy dream life that a lot of dieting companies and programs like to sell. When we're in a calorie deficit, we can have these kind of reactions in our bodies to where our hunger hormones and our fullness hormones are kind of off. Our hunger drive can go up. What makes us feel full can go down. So we're talking about hunger and fullness hormones like ghrelin and leptin. Our metabolism can be affected in a negative way, not just on the physical side, but also talking on the mental side or that psychological side. A lot of times people find themselves in this kind of binge restriction cycle. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, what we see is this kind of weight cycling as a result of that. Lose 10 pounds, gain 15, lose 20, gain 25, lose 30, gain 35, kind of in that way, essentially dieting their way up to where they're at. A lot of people who I have worked with who are at their highest weight currently have gotten there through a lifetime of dieting. The dieting industry is a $59 billion industry. Part of the reason, in my opinion, why the industry is so strong is because of that dieting cycle. A lot of people don't just go on one diet and that's it. They are pretty much lifers. And sometimes when people are at a higher weight from that kind of cycling, that can actually put more stress on the body, making them more prone to certain diseases. We have seen that the cycling down and up can have some damage to blood vessels, impacting cardiovascular disease. And so sometimes people see people at a higher weight and see them having cardiovascular disease and assume it to be because of their weight and because of kind of what they're eating and everything, without looking beforehand, seeing all of the different restriction and the diets that they have gone to, and that weight cycling piece and how much that plays a role into it. And so we are learning more about that and the impacts that that can have on someone and their increased risk of things like diabetes and other metabolic conditions, hypertension as well. It's kind of this whole idea, we can't just reduce it down to this correlation, that whole idea of correlation versus causation. We really have to look at, why is this happening? Is it a result of somebody who has never dieted and their intake is not really supporting or promoting that physical health piece of health? Or is it something that might kind of be a part of that, but also have so much other behind the scenes as well? It's also well established that a lot of people who are from historically marginalized groups can be at a higher weight, and overall just people at a lower socioeconomical status as well. Just looking at kind of what has been established already, what we know about things like the social determinants of health. And of course, the stress from any discrimination, that also can play a very physical role in that person's health as well. And if there is a mistrust in the medical system, people can go longer without having the appropriate care as needed and just making everything a little bit more challenging down the line. So where I am coming from is that we are on so much firmer ground, more firm ground, when we can promote actions that are sustainable and that promote physical health but don't also harm any of those other aspects of health and push people into this kind of restriction binge cycle. We can have those lifestyle improvements without having to focus on that weight piece. When we have lifestyle improvements, we might see a change in weight. We might see a change for like decrease or increase. We also might see it stay neutral. Just kind of depends on what the lifestyle was before and how the body will respond to it after, based off their metabolism, their activity, even different kind of conditions, if they have hypothyroidism or anything of that nature, or if they have to take steroids. That can impact a lot too. And so that's why I never want to say like I will 100% help you lose X amount of pounds. Like, can I do that? Yes. When I was starting my career as a registered dietitian, I was more weight focused, and I wasn't just weight focused, but that was something that I would really focus in on, of helping people who would come to me who would want to make those specific kind of weight changes. And it's not to say that we wouldn't have healthy actions and like just kind of blend some things, but a lot of times those weight goals would kind of outweigh the other healthy actions, and sole focus began to be on that scale and what that number said. That is a more conventional approach of weight management. Like, it just is. At both extremes, yes, we can see where weight adversely impacts your health, but a weight-focused dieting approach doesn't change the fact that it rarely is helpful. It's helpful for a minority of people who are able to have those diets and keep that off. That is a very small number of people. For something with a poor outcome for the majority of people, it does not make sense in an evidence-based approach to push that onto the majority of people, especially when we have evidence that consistently healthy actions and practices that support your physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being can really improve your health. And this is including lab values as well, things that we can see or that we can get from labs and see. So it's not this kind of thing as letting yourself go, as some people might think. We can still focus on that support and promotion of that physical health piece. 4 of my foundational ways I like to do this is, number 1, approaching food with curiosity, compassion, and context, and food neutrality overall. So having that curiosity of, how hungry are you? Are you really hungry? What kind of food sounds good? What kind of texture, flavor, temperature, things of that nature. Also compassion. Are you approaching food when you're in a heightened emotional state? We want to have that compassion piece towards ourselves so that we can adequately nourish ourselves, whether that means food or something else that's going to be more beneficial. There's also the context. Are you going out to go take a walk? Are you going out to go run 5 miles? Are you going to the gym and gonna do some heavy squats? You're going to have different contexts needing different foods. A good example of kind of the next piece of food neutrality that I always fall back on is if you were at the start of a half marathon or a marathon and you hadn't eaten that day at all. If I showed up and I gave you two handfuls or 2 options of either kale or something like graham crackers or something like that, most of the time people are going to say that kale is always going to be healthy and something like a graham cracker or cookie or in that nature is not going to be healthy. But in that case, if you have not eaten anything, looking at the context, if I gave you a handful of kale, you're probably going to have some digestive discomfort and potentially have to sit down or fall because you don't have enough of that energy to keep going. So in that moment, the kale is not a healthy option. And so approaching food with that curiosity, compassion, and context, and the food neutrality piece is really helpful when we are talking about consistent changes that we can do that really do support that physical piece of the health definition. And remember, going back to the HAES principles, it was talking about the health enhancement that supports policies that improve and equalize access to information and services and personal practices that improve human well-being. So like, it is not, I feel like sometimes people can think that this health at every size approach is really not healthy and not health promoting, when like foundationally the principle, it really is. If people are taking it out of context and saying things that what the trademark and what the website is not talking about, then yeah, I can agree with you, and I can say like, yeah, maybe some of the things aren't so health promoting, but that's not what the framework is. Like, let's get back to what the source is. The next thing is being able to recognize hunger and fullness cues. That is something that sometimes people reduce intuitive eating to, when it is so much more. That has a whole nother framework, and there's a lot more principles that goes into that than health at every size. It's kind of like a focused part of that can still fit into there. But I mean, even with that, recognizing hunger and fullness cues, that is something that we have to approach differently for people who maybe are not neurotypical, who maybe don't have those kind of like hunger and fullness cues that they recognize throughout the day. There are different ways, but that's just kind of like an umbrella of being more mindful with that area. But definitely there is a lot to take into application individually. I also like to encourage the incorporation of foods that support your whole health, and talking about that definition again, your physical health, even your mental health, your social emotional well-being. All foods can have a very intentional part of our lives, unless they're like old or you're allergic to them or something of that nature. We can learn how to approach maybe those more foods that are maybe less nutrient dense, maybe more event style foods. We can learn how to approach those in a way that still nourishes our whole self and doesn't allow or doesn't have us fall into this kind of binge cycle. And when I'm talking about binge, I am not talking about the actual defined eating disorder. That is something that an eating disorder specialist will be very helpful and important to work with. I'm just talking about the kind of binge restriction cycle that happens a lot with chronic dieters. And then I also like approaching having this kind of plan of care, which your plan of care is something that we can rely on or we can turn to in those moments when we might not be able to have as much focus or like physical energy or mental energy to be able to make those choices that really align with our physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being, where it's just like life gets wild. And it's not a matter of if that's going to happen, it's more about when. And so having that backup plan of care can be really helpful. So an example of this specifically for food might be being sure that you have frozen meals on hand, even if those are purchased, like fully cooked frozen meals that you just have to heat up in the microwave, or having other kinds of foods that are going to nourish you, that are going to make you feel a little bit more energized, like having those on hand, how to have those on hand, and also the plan of care of if you find that you are approaching food with the curiosity, compassion, and context, if you're often approaching food with a lot of negative emotion, like what can we do other on that plan of care that you can just turn to that doesn't require you to do a lot of that mental work right in that moment? What can we do to make it easier? Right, so there is nothing wrong with wanting to change your weight intentionally. I mean, we're treated, I think we can all agree that there is some kind of fitness privilege or thin privilege. You are treated differently depending on your weight, at least here in the United States. And so I am not trying to fault anybody or shame anybody for wanting to change their weight. And all I'm going to say is that if it is something that, if your dieting worsens, if it's helping your physical health but it's harming your mental, social, or emotional well-being, then it really doesn't fit that definition of health. And so again, if your desire isn't health, that's a whole nother thing, like you do you. But if your desire is that health, there is a way to approach those changes in a way where it doesn't harm those other aspects. So I mentioned before that we can see our improvements in our health by lab values. Sometimes medications can really help with that too, and we can't just rely on food. I have hypothyroidism, I have Hashimoto's, and so that is something that food plays a role in, but medication also plays a role in getting to the appropriate lab values. And I would say in my case that medications have a bigger role in that, but it's something that we can kind of do to support that piece. Other ways that we can see health and aim for it include better digestion, balanced blood glucose levels, increased vegetable intake, eating more regularly and intentionally, noticing what affects your eating speed, scheduling appetite check-ins, adding more minimally processed, nutrient-dense foods into your intake, planning meals or snacks that include balance, that include some protein, starting a food and feelings journal, improving sleep environments. All of these things we can see improve health and don't have to have that kind of weight-focused approach. And sometimes people have the question of, well, how will I know if I am moving to an improved health place if I'm not tracking weight? And so some examples might be more physical energy. Maybe you're moving better, doing things that maybe you haven't done before, like physically, or it's been a while. Better mental clarity or better mood. Getting consistent, balanced energy, being able to pair together meals easier and quicker. Your body is feeling more comfortable. Maybe you're waking up a little bit more energized and ready to go. Improved digestion. Maybe more cravings for those nutrient-dense foods as well, and more. So while we are building, or while we are doing these healthy actions, or these actions that support our health, that are sustainable, we are building a lot of skills, including planning, prioritizing, preparing, matching energy intake to needs, providing adequate nutrients, moving more often and well, rest and recovery is improved, creating a supportive environment, help to have more of that regulation around food and eating and your mood, choosing higher quality food options. When I say higher quality, that doesn't always mean like higher in price, but just like nutrient dense wise. So overall, application and intentionality are big parts when we are wanting to kind of step into what it would look like if we want to stop focusing on that weight change and focus more so on that health change. Approaching food with that curiosity, compassion, and context, and food neutrality is so important when we're talking about sustainability of a plan or an implementation of sorts for health promotion, and it is the absolute opposite of letting yourself go. So that is it for today's video. I would love to hear if you have any other ways that you like to promote or support your health that don't fall into dieting culture. Please give this video a like if you liked it, only if you want, and make sure you're subscribed. I will leave a download. I've been having a different download in all of my other videos, and I thought I had updated it, but apparently not. So I will have a download for foundations that align with kind of what this video was talking about. So check that out if you want to get that for free. That is it. Remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.